never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn
Hi
around.
guys, welcome back to Neff Inspiration, a show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stephan, Neff. Another fantastic day for an interview, and today I have got Jason Stanley with me. We two are both fascinated, intrigued, and hooked, really, on the science behind obesity. We both have in our past been bigger boys, and we both have been able to look the food monster deep in the eyes. We tackled our demons. And we did so by actually learning so much more about neuroplasticity and about what is really going on with emotional overeating and so many other things. So today, a deep dive into the food monster of obesity and of cross addiction and of all those wonderful things that we can do something about, and where suddenly we make our lives so much easier, so much better, and turning us into better human beings. Jason, welcome to my show.
Thank you so much, Stephan. It's a pleasure and honor to be here.
Oh, brilliant. Emotional overeating, crikey. I mean, what better topic could we tackle tonight? Because when you look now, just the last 10 years, the obesity epidemic in the United States, as a classic example there, is nuts. It's crazy. If I could just show you a presentation that I've recently done on that topic, where we see suddenly the obesity taking off like mad. And you think, what the hell? I mean, what is your take on that? I mean, what do you believe is happening there?
Well, that's a really good question, and nobody's ever asked me that, so thank you. But to answer the question, what do I think has gone on? Why the obesity has exploded? And just for those viewers who are not familiar with the history, obesity was flatlined for hundreds of years, both in Europe and then in the States for the first several hundred years, up until about 1980, and then it started climbing dramatically. So it's gone from a flat line, roughly around 10%, to now in the States, where we have very good data, about 43% of our population. So each decade it explodes. To answer that question, we have to look at what the food monster actually is, how it's created, and then how that interacts with the changes in the culture. And it really boils down to cultural shifts in the last 20, 30 years, which the way we eat, the way we do things is dramatically different than it was, say, when I was a young boy. I was raised in the 50s. So the way we do things now, just eating in front of the TV, for example, or eating while we're gaming, etc. Those are the things that are now really skyrocketing that obesity, but we have to understand why that is. It's not why did the culture change, but why does that culture change have the impact that it's having? And with that, we have to understand what the food monster is and how it's created in the neural pathways, how that neural pathway gets locked in during childhood, and what it actually is.
You're quite right. But if that was true, then this food monster would have been locked in at a time when the social norms were different, as you pointed out in yourself. So
Yes.
your statement would say that actually this food monster is in everyone. And why does it come out suddenly with such a vengeance?
Yeah, it is not in everyone, because everyone is not experiencing the same exact culture. And when I say culture, we automatically think of the broader culture, the American culture, the British culture, whatever the culture is of your home country. But we also have a familial culture. What's the culture at home? And that is where the food monster is created through your personal childhood. So the person next door was raised in the home separately, very differently than the way you were raised. And we can see that when we look at the person who, when stressed, emotionally eats, or when stressed, emotionally can't eat, they lose their appetite, or the person who's stressed doesn't change their appetite one way or the other. We call those people natural eaters.
Mm.
And we can roll that back and look into their childhood, and that's where we see the difference.
Now that makes perfect sense. And I 100% agree with you because nowadays we've got data that looks into adverse childhood experiences and the familiar circumstances thereof, and can directly correlate that with an increased amount
Mhm.
of such adverse childhood experiences. We see a significant deterioration of health. And unfortunately, obesity is just one of these. And it's not just a marker, it's maybe a conduit, it's maybe a catalyst of increasing inflammation within the body, within the brain, within every cell of the body, really. And that is what we have come to see nowadays. It came to fruition, so to speak, and of course worsened with socioeconomic challenges and with regards
Mhm.
to the downturns, with regards to the COVID pandemic, with regards to societal shifts. There's a lot of stuff happening. And
Oh, you have?
unfortunately, we see it now with people out there just trying to escape their reality with the help of food.
Yes. And you're absolutely right. That I'm going to back in because you made a couple of very important comments there. One is obesity is a huge health issue, and it does, in and of itself, increase inflammation. Inflammation being the root of heart disease, diabetes,
Mm,
all kinds of issues, even
absolutely.
Alzheimer's. The root is inflammation. But I
Mm,
do want to back up on another thing, and that is it turns out, and we see this more and more now than we did 20, 30, 40 years ago, that adverse environment during childhood is not required. It's very, very impactful, but it is not required to wind up with adult long-term permanent obesity. We
mm,
can have children who have an environment that is actually loving and
mm,
wonderful and happy,
absolutely.
and that environment creates the conditions for obesity. And just a little insight into that. The
Mm,
bottom line with all of that is that throughout childhood, it has to go throughout childhood for the most part, is that while eating, the child feels basically safe, accepted, and not stressed. Now, if you throw in an adverse childhood on top of that, which is you
mm,
were talking about, and
mm,
the ACEs, ACEs study is a big study with thousands of participants where they backed in and really showed this. If you throw in this adverse environment, divorce, low SES, socioeconomic status, etc., those people tend to have more obesity and more severe,
mm,
both in chronicity over time and in how large they are.
mm,
So the adverse situation enhances or maybe increases, makes it much worse, but it's not absolutely not required. In the ACEs study, they
mm,
showed, roughly speaking, about 49, 51% those who came from a normal childhood and those who came from
mm.
an adverse childhood. So I
Wow.
make that point, Stephan, not
Mm,
to pick with,
mhm,
with what you said, but there are plenty of people who I've worked with that said, I had a pretty normal childhood. I was pretty happy. And plenty of people have
mm,
said, oh my God, my childhood was horrible. But
mm.
it's not, that's not the basis. And for years I thought it was. And by the way, I've even published books saying that it was, but I was wrong.
Ah, and that's lovely how you put it, because ultimately you could also say, well, hang on, what is the genetics like? Clearly, it is handed down in generations, both obesity genes, if there is such a thing, not really, but
No,
also the intergenerational trauma, the trauma that is handed down from generations in our genetic
absolutely.
material.
Yes.
Having said all that, here we are in functional medicine nowadays. We recognize that it is the epigenetics that is of such importance. Yes, you
Yes.
have these genes, and some of these genes are really not so nice. I give you that. But at the
Mhm.
same token, that might be 5 or 10% of the whole thing, but the 90% is what we then, the kind of epigenetic factors, the soup that we wash over our genes, that then
Hmm.
cause either the start of a disease kind of pathway or the opposite. And that is quite amazing. So you're quite right. This is not as simple as, oh, well, just pick one factor out. It's the genes, or pick the aces, or pick one thing. That would be nice if life is so bloody easy.
Yes.
It isn't.
It isn't. And you absolutely nailed it when you mentioned the epigenetics. There's actually quite a bit of research, not on humans, but in rat studies on obese parents who gave offspring that were obese, and then they slimmed the parent down, and the offspring later on was not obese. It's real, real good, clean, good stuff on the studies. And of course, we know a lot about the epigenetics in human studies with people who came out of Auschwitz, their children having the diseases and their grandchildren even. So it's a combination of epigenetics. And I know I shook my head when you said genetics. I know it's not genetics, but is epigenetics. And
Yeah,
you have to have the culture because you can
yeah,
have an obese parent.
yeah.
And if you're raised, if somebody clicks on and say, I'm no longer going to use lollipops as
Mm,
reward. I'm not going to
mm,
give food as reward. Food is not the safe place. Food is just food.
mm,
Those children grow up to be normal weight.
mm,
So you have to have the two, or just the latter part, just the
mm,
social part. It will do it on its own. But epigenetics is a huge impactor, but it will not be the driver.
I like it.
So thank
Having
you for
said,
digging into that.
oh, absolutely, because
Yeah.
there's so much information out there and so many studies, and I can pull a study for every single argument that we possibly could throw here into the mix. But I think the reality is life will never be so easy that we can just nail it down to one topic. And therefore, those people who think, oh, great, we can cure obesity by just an injection of whatever the newest GLP-1 or 5 or 10 inhibitor or activator is.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, about that. As if that would suddenly cure everything. So no, I strongly disagree with that. I would like to come back though to the genetics because
Mhm.
looking back at my upbringing, I was brought up by my great grandmother because my mum was single mum, had to go out working. So I was brought up with my great grandmother who had gone through the First World War and had gone through the Second World War. She was a refugee. So therefore, there was you always eat up the last morsel. It doesn't matter how full you are, push it in. And everything was very rich diet, I have to say, because it was, whilst we didn't have much money to save, but she tried to give me the best possible love. And in her mind,
Mhm.
love, because she suffered so much, love was food.
Yes.
So do you have got these kind of influences there that have deeply, deeply marked her, and that was handed down to me in my belief
Mhm.
systems, also probably in my genes.
That would be handed down in the epigenetics
Mm,
and in the belief systems, but it's also I don't want to say handed down, it actually creates a pathway in the amygdala,
mm,
which is when we understand the amygdala, for those of your viewers and listeners who are not familiar with the different parts of the brain, the amygdala is the sentry, it's the guard at the
mm,
front of the brain that it patterns, but it does not understand language, which is why regardless of the type of therapy you go into, whether it's a Weight Watchers social kind of a program, a, a cognitive behavior therapy,
mm.
or all the way up to psychotherapy, those programs all work. You lose the weight, but 18 months later, 97% failure, 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 failure. So why? Well, because they're all dealing with the cognitive brain
Mm,
or the social connections, etc. They don't touch the amygdala, which is 100% non-linguistic. It operates binary. It's either safe or it's in danger. And when you have emotion, you have stress,
Mm.
that's interpreted as danger. Now, let me give the people out there just a little bit of understanding. Unless you're from Canada, this doesn't work. If you're from Canada, you'll know why in a second. Okay, you walk around the corner, and on the ground is a garden hose or a piece of rope, and you jump back because your brain says snake, and you jump before you even recognize what it is. A split second later, you go, oh, that's just the hose. And you kind of feel silly, but your heart is just beating, it's pounding because your brain said, danger, 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 snake.
Mm.
They don't have snakes in Canada. It's too cold. That's why they get away with that. But anybody who lives in a world where snakes are, you have that automatic response. And not every time, but every once in a while, that's the amygdala going, hey, watch out, you're in danger, go to a place of safety. And in this case, it's jump back. And now we're born with very few, we meaning people are born with very few things that we have response to. Creepy crawly, spider, snakes. That's kind of one that seems to be common. So that's the amygdala doing its thing. So if you have the pattern in your amygdala throughout childhood, you were told you must eat everything, you must force it in no matter how full you are. Oh, then I know I did same thing when I cleaned my plate. My mom had a little fuzzy haircut. She'd reach over and rub me on the head and say, "Oh, you're such a good little eater. You're my good little boy." And I would just be all proud and full of love because I ate everything.
Mm.
And that told my patterning during childhood that said, okay, when you do this thing, you're safe and good. And that becomes hardwired in that part of the brain. So for the rest of my life, if I don't actively unhardwire it, so to speak, or potentiated pathway is what it's called. I don't actively remove that potentiation, which you have to go with very special therapy technique to do that, then without it, it's going to be there for life. And you're going through functional medicine. So there's the two therapies that work. One is EMDR, which is acknowledged by the American Psychiatric Association. The other is havening. Havening is a much more modern, user-friendly therapy, but they both operate on the principle of activation of the pathway and then flood the brain with the wave. That's the fundamental process.
Let's come to that in a moment. I certainly
Yes.
want to explore that with you. But something that you said in a side sentence needs to be stressed, because here we are. We could always go back to in time to our previous generation and generation before, and we can say, well, they didn't know better. Well, they tried as good as they could with what they had at hand. I want to say two things there. Firstly, 1992, the food pyramid was put in place. And nowadays we know that this was a heap of BS, unfortunately. And that
Yes,
really
unfortunately, yes.
started the obesity taking off with the focus on really highly processed, lots of carbohydrate-rich food. Exactly.
They
Exactly.
dovetail. It's not the
So
root cause, but they absolutely dovetail. Yes.
exactly. So you have got that happening there. So just to give our parents a chance, because they were
Sure.
told, that is how you look after your children. So to a certain degree, we have to say, okay, guys, yes, we give you that. But having said that, let's rephrase that. Even nowadays, you still see a very similar misguided love happening. Imagine a little child falling over and has grazed itself. It came off its bike, has got a big, bruise and bit of blood on its knee. Very few people will sit down with the child and will say, oh, wow, this is pain, isn't it? Yeah, it's not very nice. And let's just wait a bit. Let's just sit together here. Let's just be together. It's not a nice emotion, but let's sit together, go through it. No, what would you give? Oh, here's a cookie. Come on, here's a cookie, or here's a Haribo, or whatever you give the child. Here's something sweet. So
You nailed it.
what does the child learn? Okay, pain. Oh, sweet. Ooh, and I feel better. great.
Yeah,
How much more can we mess up our little children? How much more can we put addictive pathways, light them up? I mean, feed the fire with kerosene for crying out loud.
absolutely. And we can take it even one step further. Now you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. But let's go to the doctor. Okay, he's got the magic white coat, and everybody respects the doctor. So the little guy goes in, gets a shot, vaccination or whatever, and the
Okay.
nurse on the way out says, "Here's a lollipop because you were so good and brave."
Okay,
So
okay.
they praised him for being a good child. You're encouraged. It's a perfect setup, and that's the culture. So I
Well,
see you're
exactly.
laughing because we all have been there. I got my penny sucker when I was 6 years old for taking the shot.
Oh, which is crazy. Having said that, there are other cultures where that is not the case. For example, in the United States and in Europe, especially sort of the fat man of Europe, i.e., the UK, we see all that happening. If you were to go to Japan, a very industrialized nation, where you don't really see the same obesity epidemic. And it's quite intriguing there because it's lovely. I saw a recent video where someone walked into a school there and asked the children there, "Oh, tell me, what's your favorite food?" And the child said, "Broccoli." The dude said, "What?" Again, the next child, "What is your favorite food?" "Brown rice." And he thought he is being taken for a ride there. He thought he was being set up. But no, no, these children had a very different upbringing. And therefore, it is permeating into the Japanese society and with much lesser obesity rates compared with other Western societies. How amazing is that?
Oh, absolutely amazing. Now, if we take that a little bit more broader, so let's take a look at the historical culture of Vietnam. And I
Mm,
picked Vietnam for a couple of reasons. One is I have personal experience there, but also because Vietnam, if you look at who has the most and the least amount of obesity, Vietnam always comes in the bottom percent. It's like the lowest one, two, or three. It's always in that
mm.
range. But right now, Vietnam is exploding with obesity. And yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's because their culture is changing and changing dramatically. And the change is tied to, unfortunately, financial success. Vietnam is one of the fastest growing economies in the world.
I did not
They're a
realize.
developing country
Mm,
still, but they're really fast growing. And because people now have money, they, uh, the people who before were the middle class, they could barely afford rice. There were other issues that kept
mm,
the food at bay. But now, the thing that you see in China, in Japan, and in most of the Asian countries, if you have a fat baby,
mm.
that means that you are doing financially well because only the upper class could do that. And
Exactly.
so now everybody is force feeding their babies. 23-year-old women are force feeding their babies because they have the funds, the extra money, the extra cash,
Mm,
and they're also following suit with a bad diet. So these
mm,
kids are getting, by the time they're in kindergarten, they are borderline, if not already obese. And so this is, and
mm,
now I was recently spent some time in Vietnam and I went and looked at the schools, the high schools today. So we're talking your 14, 15, 16, 17, up through 18. And those kids, oh my goodness, unfortunately, we see it more in the girls than the boys, but we see I would say 10% of the young girls are clearly overweight. Move it down into middle school, that 10% jumps to about 15. Move it down into primary,
mm,
you're at 20. Go down into the kindergarten level,
mm.
and it's up to 20, 25%. And
Wow.
that's so we see the culture change
Wow.
and that. Now, go back 40 years ago when I first looked at this, and we saw then an amazing dynamic which explains a little bit about how this works. And that is in the Middle East, the traditional conservative Middle East, where the women wore burqa and the men and women did not mix. The Middle East at that point had the highest incidence of obesity in the world, while their men were very low incidence of obesity. Switch it over to China, and the men, not near as high, but they were quite a bit out of pocket with obesity, where the women were very low. But you look at the culture, we can most of us understand why the women were obese, because their only place, the only solace they had was in the kitchen with each other, and the moms were, and the culture was, here, baby, here, eat something, try this, we're cooking, and food was central to their life. But conversely, with the Chinese culture 40 years ago, the little boys, it was Asia at that point, always venerated the son, and the daughter was the servant. That was the deal. And back then, the culture was always have a girl first and then have a son, because the girl will always take care of you. It's her job to take care of you in your old age. So that the little girl was trained to take care of the son, usually a younger brother, if everything worked out, all of her life. She was a servant. So eating was not a joy. For him, through his childhood, it was an absolute joy. He got to be the man. He got to be and so they had this completely inverse situation where in the Asian culture, men were obese. In the Middle Eastern culture, the women were obese. And you can tie that right back to culture. It's a good insight into how this mechanism works. Even with traditional foods. Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting, isn't it? But here we are. I mean, it's 2024 as we are recording that, and you should think, with all the data available, with all the information available, we should become more enlightened beings. We should, with nowadays everyone is a victim and is in tune with their feelings, seemingly emotionally aware. Yeah, why the hell are things so out of kilter? Why are we getting worse? We've touched upon some things, but is it not, if we are saying that this is purely a malprogramming, should we not also now say that everyone should have the possibility to easily tap into resources to reprogram themselves?
Actually, yes. You've got a couple of really great questions in there. One is, why are we in the space we're in? And then the second one is there reasonable access? So the first is, yes, there's absolute reasonable access. We can talk about that later. But why don't we know? Well, one of the things is, and I'm not going to point my finger negatively at people, this is just the way it is. Now, we know that doctors have one course, maybe two, on nutrition. They really don't know much about it, right? They know a lot about pharmacology and physiology and all that, but they don't. And what do they know about the brain? Well, they're no more trained than the priest or the cop. They're really no more trained that way. I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on them.
You're right. No. I give you that.
So the obese person comes in and says, "Doc, help me. What do I do?" Change your lifestyle. Stop eating less and exercise more. Because that's all they know. That's really just lazy thinking. But they got to deal with this person's diabetes. They got to deal with their fatty liver. They got to deal with all that. And they got 15 minutes before the bean counter's over there saying, "Doc, you're spending too much time."
Yep.
Diet and exercise. Go to the nutritionist. And nutritionists, even diabetes nutritionists, are still peddling carbohydrates.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm not trying to beat that up as carbs aren't all bad and all that kind of stuff. But look, if the nutritionists are peddling the get fat food, what chance do we have? And nutritionists, well, I saw a headline yesterday. Nutritionist says McDonald's burgers are good food, healthy food. Okay, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But no, it's not healthy food. And I believed that for years. Well, hey, it's a hamburger, it's got lettuce, but no, it's not healthy. I was guilty, even though I understood the brain process in obesity.
No, I
So the
think, and
problem
that,
is we have tons of momentum and very little information. This sounds like I'm trying to be, I don't know, extremely arrogant or something, but honest to goodness here, Doc, I'm the only person, literally at this point in the world, that has put this childhood patterning, with the therapy together. And just this last June, I delivered a paper at my professional conference explaining how these two things work. It's the first time it's been made public. And I've written books that were wrong, had wrong information. I mean, this is my life's journey. It's my quest. And I've written wrong books, gone out and done clinical studies that didn't work. Nobody
Jason,
was.
Jason, there's a beautiful quote from 1956 from the Dean of Harvard University. And he was speaking to students and he said, 50% what I'm teaching you today will be wrong or obsolete in 10 years' time. We just don't know which 50% it is. Nowadays, this time frame is not 10 years, it's 5 years or even less. So
That's
give
right.
yourself some credit there. So it's come on. You can there are new insights, there are new developments. And
Yes.
obviously when I started, I studied medicine in the 90s. Yes, this food pyramid was absolutely something that was hammered into me. And of course I lived in Germany, where we've got the most beautiful bakeries. And honestly, we have got some really yummy stuff. Now, there was actually, interestingly enough, even though whilst that was true, I still actually had, when I was young, actually, not quite, sorry, when I was at university and I went into the biochemistry, etc., I actually ate very healthy with hindsight. How? I don't know, but it was certainly a good time. It was full of exercise, full of martial arts, full of yummy food, healthy food. But then, you get more and more yummy food, less and less that is from having lots of yummy protein, etc., to then the spaghetti carbonara, to very carbohydrate and trans fat rich kind of
Right.
foods. My goodness, it's so easy, and that's what life does.
Yes,
So
it is.
I think we both have straight off the path. But then again, we're also nowadays here, and we have actually regained a better understanding of the way our body works, the way our feelings influence our hormones. And with that, I mean the fight and flight, the constant being driven, constant being, chased by internal and external influences that raise our cortisol, that actually cause more inflammation. Add to that bad choices in the food. And I loved the joke that you made about the burgers. It was now probably 20 years ago. There was a study where they actually took burger meat from two big burger chains without naming them, but obviously it was Burger King and McDonald's. And so
Obviously.
cut them down, these burgers, and put them under the microscope. And then actually looked what is in there. And respectively, it was 13 and 14% of meat fibers, and the rest was beaks and claws and whatever, blood vessels.
Oh
And it
my
was
goodness, yeah.
well, exactly. So if you think about a collagen-rich diet, and you were probably right, but it was certainly not the protein that your body deserved and needed. So you're quite right. So it's a whole crazy thing happening. So it's a multifactorial contribution
Yes.
to us becoming really big. But I want to come back to your passion, to the changing of the programming, to the changing of the fight and flight, and towards providing a safe environment within your brain. And the haven, the havening, to have a safe haven, well, that's a bit of a giveaway already, that this
It
is
is.
actually
Yeah.
one strategy to help people deal in a different way with the stresses in their life. Let's talk a bit about that. Tell us a
Sure.
bit about your approach towards
Well,
resetting our
resetting.
amygdala.
That's a good way of putting it. It's resetting. Let's understand that what you're having is a compulsive behavior, and that compulsive behavior is set by the patterning in childhood. So when we say safety, haven, safe haven, it's not like a sanctuary where you go, say, in the church environment where you're safe from the dangers outside. It's not quite that, although it implies that, but that's not the case. What it is havening removes or dissolves, I think is maybe a better word, resolves the patterns. So it literally takes the patterns out of that part of the brain. Now, it doesn't take the neurology apart, it doesn't take the neurons away. But what happens is when you are patterning, and let's use adult PTSD as our model to kind of understand this. This is where we have a lot of research.
Mm,
Understand that my work on childhood patterning is theoretical. We have really good, solid science on the PTSD situation.
mm,
PTSD resides in the exact same part of the brain, in the amygdala.
mm,
So when you have this adult situation that creates high stress trauma, the brain goes out of the alpha, beta kind of brainwave into the gamma, where it's just going crazy. It's just this manic state.
mm,
When that occurs, and you're going down the pathway of the behavior or the experience, then that tells the brain, hey, there's something really special happening here. And
mm,
so I'm going to use my hands as to show a neural pathway.
mm,
For those of you who are listening, can't see, I have my hands open and there's a little bit of gap between them. So one arm, inside my arm would be the neural pathway, the neuron, and inside there is a molecule, and it's being pushed down that
mm,
by electrical charge. It gets to the end, so to the skin of my first hand, and it stops there.
mm,
But no, it has to go into the other neuron across, and the electricity, pow, gives it a shot, and it jumps across that synapse and lands.
mm,
Now, right now, you, I, everybody listening is listening and thinking and doing. So what's happening is that lands on a naive or clean slate, a naive neuron. And so within the neuron, there is called a little portal, a little window is pushed in through the skin there and the membrane, and that molecule goes through that, and then the portal goes away, drifts away, either inside or out into the soup of the brain. And that neuron becomes naive again for the next thought. And it can be a completely unrelated thought. Those neurons stay there. But under the circumstances of PTSD, that portal gets welded, it gets stuck in that spot. Now, there won't be one, there'll be dozens on this place, and they get stuck. Actually, proteins get stuck in there, and they metaphorically they weld that portal in. So now, and the molecule goes on down, but those are there waiting for the next time. So you have a danger thought. It doesn't matter what the danger is, you have a danger thought, or in the case of PTSD, you get triggered. The veteran hears a shot or screeching tires on the
mm,
TV. The person who was in a bad accident, they see the kind of car that they were in the accident in, or the car that hit them. And they go, oh my God, and they get triggered. Well, the reason they're triggered and all the way back into the full panic state is because that pathway is now a highway.
mm,
They have a ready-built bridge to accept those thoughts. And it doesn't take
mm,
that little nanosecond to make the jump.
mm,
It's already waiting for it. And then it gets stronger and stronger because what we know in the brain is neurons that fire together, wire together is the thing we say. So the neurons around that will start picking up the same thing.
mm,
And these may not be potentiated, but they are wired as such as deep habits. So what we have to do, and I know I'm really out here in the weeds, but what we have to do is we have to create a therapy that will dissolve that welding. So those portals will go and do what they're supposed to do, and that is return back into the soup of the brain. Well, you do that by activating that pathway. Like, remember when that car hit you and you thought you were going to die? Oh my God, yeah, yeah. And so the person is very anxious. Or in the case of my work, when mom was giving you that cookie, how did you feel? I felt love and acceptance and joy. So we bring up the pathway, whatever the issue is, and then we do stimulation on the face and on the arms on skin, very specific skin that this is science, this is not woo-woo, this is real science. We know that if we stimulate certain skin, that it actually results in creating delta wave in the brain. So that skin is on the skin of the forehead and the skin on the cheeks above the cheekbones. Now, men, it's real easy to see below the cheekbones, they have hair follicles. The skin is different above the cheekbones. You look at your own hand, at the palm of your hand and the back of your hand, the skin is very different. So what science knows is that this is has a name, it's called gametic. Don't worry about that, that's just showing off, changing the name. But it has different nerve endings in it, and it responds differently. So we can either stimulate it right now I'm just rubbing the palm of my hand, and that stimulates that delta wave, or we can put a vibrating pad. The researchers that did this stuff to figure out what happens here, that they use vibrating pads over the entire body to see what the brain waves were in response to that. And so it's mapped out. We know where to do it. So what we do now in the therapy is we stimulate the skin on the face, on the outside edge of the upper arm, from the elbow, from the shoulder down to the elbow, and on the palms of the hands. And that creates the delta while that pathway is stimulated, and that gradually, or in cases of PTSD, often very quickly, eliminates that welding. It de-patterns, if you will. It depotentiates the actual world. But for those of us who are not medical and don't care about it, it just simply unwinds the patterning. It blows the bridge and slows everything down so you don't have that highway in your brain that when stressed, whatever the fear is, whatever the stress is, takes you down that place. And in the case of eating, the emotional eater, when they're stressed, it takes them to the place of safety. Here's your lollipop for being a brave little boy. Here's the cookie. You're my little girl. You're my little sweetheart. Oh, dinner time is the best time of the day. Or it's a lousy environment, horrible environment, chaos. But when I eat, I'm watching TV, and TV is entertaining me, and I feel safe because I'm being entertained.
I hear you. I hear you. I mean, shall we do it in practice? You were pointing out these areas here, and ultimately what you're showing me is actually a nice gentle facial massage. Because if you actually look through where a massage would be, again, for those of us only listening here, I'm just above my eyebrows, and that's a typical area that is being massaged, equally underneath our eyes. Interestingly enough, this the supraorbital nerve and the infraorbital nerve. So direct links that nerves have with the trigeminal nerve into the brain itself. So there are actually really nice links already. We're using neural pathways that we are using to actually, readjust things within the brain. So we have got pathways that are there. So,
and if we take it away from the science for just a second here, and think of the average person out there, the average listener, the regular person, we kind of intuitively know this. When we see somebody who's really stressed, what are they doing? Well, they're rubbing their hands, or they're rubbing their face, or we get a kid who's all wrapped up on sugar or something, and what do? We grab them, hug them, and you see the parent rubbing the kid up and down on the arm. Okay, sweetheart, calm down, calm down. We do these behaviors because even though we have no idea that we're creating delta wave in the brain, which is very calming, we're doing it instinctively. You just watch behavior, you'll see it.
Interesting. Of course it is. But now that you're putting it together and putting it in different words, suddenly there's a picture appearing there. Interesting.
And we can take a guy like you who has all of this knowledge about the neurons and the pathways, and you just tie it together for us. Wow, look at that. So there it is.
Interesting. Well, what can we do? Shall we do an example? So,
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
so, and what is, maybe we should say there's EMDR on the one
Mhm.
hand, which is more the kind of tapping, isn't it? The kind of,
Mm,
well, I mean, how would you describe those things? Because there's so many things out there. There's so many practitioners out there who practice different things, call it
mhm,
different things. There's probably a
mhm.
Venn diagram of different people doing different things, and some of them overlap. How would you describe it to make it easier for people out there to understand what kind of approaches
Sure,
are being taken? Where are the
sure.
commonalities? Where are the differences?
Okay. Well, you mentioned tapping. EMDR is not
Mm,
tapping. Tapping originated as emotional freedom technique, and that works on the meridian. That's what it's set up for, is the meridians. However, however, if you look at the tapping points, um, what you'll see is people tap at the base of the eyebrow,
mm,
right? Side of the eye,
mm,
under the eye,
mm,
under the nose, on the chin, collarbone, top, under the arm, and top of the
mm.
head.
Yeah.
So let's go back to what we've just talked about. We know that the skin above the eye, on the forehead, stimulates um, delta wave. We know this, that's science. We know that the skin on the cheek stimulates delta wave.
Mm,
So we look at all of the tapping points in those two places. Now, if you're just tapping with a single finger on the base of the eyebrow, you're missing it. But most people will use their hand, all four fingers, to tap.
mm,
Well, you're
mm.
up in this area
Yeah.
where above the, and so you're tapping. And remember, the science was done with vibrating pads. So you're tapping, you're hitting a little bit of delta wave.
Mm,
Same thing under the eye.
mm,
You're hitting a little bit of delta wave because you're stimulating
mm.
those nerve endings. So there is this thing. Now, unfortunately, with obesity, it isn't enough. And I can say that so firmly because I did a clinical study with it and I failed. I wrote it, I published it, it's public, it's in my second book, and it failed. It doesn't work.
Right.
Okay, well, embarrass myself again, but it doesn't work.
No,
Now,
no, no,
EMDR,
you've successfully figured out what does not work. You didn't
it's
fail.
science.
Okay, let's call
It's
what it
just science.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, EMDR. Now, again, back to the science. When EMDR was first released, they didn't know why it worked. They only knew that it worked. So, what is EMDR and why we get this thing about tapping? Well, you get a light bar in front of you. It doesn't have to be, but that helps. And there'll be a light that'll click off on one side, then the light will back and forth, and your eyes will travel back and forth. Hold your head still.
Mm,
The eyes have lateral movement. Well,
mm,
guess what happens when you move your eyes laterally, holding your head still?
mm.
It creates delta wave. That's the other way
Yep.
to create delta wave in the brain. Now, just kind of here's a plug for Havening. When you stimulate the skin and the face on the forehead and the cheeks, it creates 90 times, not 90%, but 90 times more delta wave than normal. When you
Right.
do stroke the arms from the shoulder down to the elbow, it creates 30 times. When you move your eyes laterally back and forth, that creates 30 times. When you rub your hands, it creates between 15 and 30 times. So just by rubbing your forehead, you're creating 300% more than you do with EMDR.
Right.
But let's understand, let's not take anything away from Dr. Shapiro, who created the EMDR technique. She is a brilliant woman because she recognized the efficacy. She understood this work, not understanding the brainwaves, not understanding what's going
Yeah.
on. She's a psychiatrist and a Stanford professor. She saw that this worked and then did clinical studies, study after study with PTSD, not with my work, but with PTSD, and it worked. Now that was, your 1961 Buick, good car for its day. But today we're in 2024. You can get a brand new Mercedes, and it's a little bit more advanced. So that's where the Havening comes in.
Right.
But tapping doesn't work. all of the meditation and all of that, the reason that seems to work is because you're calming yourself down. You're taking the stress out. And when you're not stressed, your amygdala says, okay, things are cool. You don't have to go eat. But it doesn't fix the problem. It just reduces the stress. The stimulus is gone. But as soon as you have stress, and wait a minute, as soon as if you're, 100 pounds overweight, try to go outside without being stressed. Try to see somebody who doesn't sneer at you. Somebody, so you can't get away from it.
An intriguing thought. Okay. So now you have got seemingly a technique, the havening, that is quite effective, to maybe even understated to a certain degree. How often or how frequent would you employ that? And in all fairness, may I say, if you are in a busy board meeting or give a presentation, you can't just rub your forehead or your thing.
Exactly.
You look a bit like a dick there. So obviously that doesn't work all the time. So what's
Absolutely
the reality? Not. What's the reality of that?
Okay, the reality is, and don't do this at home, kind of a thing. First of all, I tried doing it where I could teach people how to do it on their own. It really doesn't work. You have to work with a therapist. Now, why? Because you have to have somebody who can interview you, who's trained, who kind of gets it, and they'll take you through. Now, this is the good, bad news, I guess, is that the people who really respond well, it takes about 12 sessions.
Interesting.
Havening session, about 12 sessions. The average is about 20 to 24 sessions. People who came from a highly stressed, especially abandonment issue, childhood, they take twice. They're up to 50 sessions, weekly sessions. So, it's 3 months, 6 months, and a year, depending on what's going on. The people that it will not work on are those people who say, oh, I'm an external processor. I don't feel my emotions. That's malarkey, and forget them. They got to feel the emotions. You got to bring this up. So that's the real world. I wish I could say, here, do this one time and it'll fix it. It won't. But do this with a therapist. And there are people worldwide who are havening. I get nothing for this to tell you to go to them. Look it up at havening.org, find somebody there. And they don't have my training yet. I've only delivered the professional paper, the science paper on, but that'll be out in the next some months. And in the meantime, I'm the only person right now who has the training, and because I did the research, and I'm just now, literally, these few weeks, wrapping up the last few people in the research. I've been at it since January of 22, so 2 3/4 years doing the research on this, and I'm starting to take clients. But I'm not trying to sell that. That's just where I'm at in the process. And I'm creating a podcast similar to what you're doing here to get this information out to people. Now, the guy who's in the boardroom, or anybody, the school teacher who's in front of a bunch of kids and it's getting on their nerves, what you can do is you don't have to do the havening that, when I was 12 years old and I had the joyful Christmas dinner. You don't do that, but you're nervous or you're having this problem and you need to calm yourself down, or you can't get your mind off the pizza that's in the refrigerator, that food chatter that's going on. Rub your hands together under the table. Just put your hands under the table, under the desk, whatever, and just kind of sit there and think, okay, I only eat when I'm hungry and I stop when I'm full. Or if it's a pizza that won't let you go, then emotionally, mentally, in your mind, eat the pizza. See yourself. I'm walking across the room, unless you're talking and have to pay attention. But if you're just, it's quiet time in the meeting, and say, okay, I see myself going across the room. What you guys can't see is under my desk. I'm constantly doing this. I'm rubbing my hands, the palms of my hands together. So I'm creating delta wave. Now in my mind, this is called direct havening, is something that was created in the research program. And so while you're doing that, you're calming your brain down, you're getting relaxed, and you go through the process of eating the thing that you want. In this case, it's the pizza. And you say, okay, I'm open the fridge. I can see myself open the fridge, get it out. I open the tinfoil. Oh, I smell the pizza. Smells so good. And get all the way into it. Then eat it. Take that first bite. And you know how that first bite's always so delicious. And you really, really savor it. Chocolate, doesn't matter what it is. And you savor it all the way. And you chew the whole thing, all your imagination. What happens, and this, I can't tell you how many people I've got that verify this at the end of it, because I've done this with people, in therapy. They say, "Oh, I'm actually more satisfied than it would be if I'd actually eaten it." So you're in the boardroom, you can do that. Yeah. So
Essentially, this seems to be quite an involved and very sort of a prolonged kind of activity, and probably also relatively expensive. How long does a session last when you look at it?
now, because I was doing research, there was a lot more involved than just the havening.
Hmm.
But the havening itself, depending on the kind of session, is 30 minutes to an hour.
Hmm.
And it can be expensive, of course.
Hmm.
Of course it can be, but
Hmm.
is it? Let's take a look at that. Let's say you have, you're an average person. So
Hmm.
you're going to take, I'm going to say 26 sessions only because that's 6 months. That takes half a year.
Hmm.
And let's say it cost you $4,000
Hmm.
worth of therapy. Well, go out to some of the well-known things, Jenny Craig,
Hmm.
and get their meal package
Oh,
for
please.
1 year, not
Please.
counting the fresh vegetables, not counting other stuff. It's
Yeah.
more than what you'll pay. And you have to do it next year and next year and next year and next year.
Touche.
So if you go through the
Touche.
havening, what
Yeah.
happens is you clear out that unrelenting urge to eat when
Hmm.
you're not hungry or to continue eating
Hmm.
when you are. It
Hmm.
doesn't solve everything, as we started off talking
Hmm.
about it. You nailed it, Stephan, when you said it's a multifactorial.
Hmm.
In my
Hmm.
research, about 80% of the people who went through the program, actually, that food monster, that unrelenting urge went away,
Hmm.
but they didn't lose weight. Only about half of those people who were successful spontaneously lost weight. The other half didn't. We had to do other things, but they've got habits. They've been obese sometimes for
Hmm.
30, 40 years.
Hmm.
They've got stress. They've got addiction. Let's not say that
Hmm.
there isn't such a thing as addiction. You can't get addicted to protein and fat, but you absolutely can get addicted to sugar or carbs, which are
Touche.
one and the same thing. So
Touche.
there's addictions engaged, and there's lifestyle, and there's all kinds of things. Even eating
Hmm.
your favorite snack with your husband or wife for 25 years while you're watching TV, it doesn't go away.
No, you're quite right.
It's complex, that one, but
But
the freedom is there. Yeah.
and it's beautiful to see that you have done that research. It's beautiful to see that you have explored a different way of addressing the funny programming ultimately that has happened earlier in our lives and has been reinforced by external and internal influences. And ultimately, it is not an easy path, but what you're providing is actually, in all fairness, yes, a reprogramming, but you also hold them accountable because you're there as part of a team, as part, you're holding their hand in a positive way. You're guiding them along a path. This is not just, hey, it's the 1st of January and we're going to change everything and I'm going to be rich and famous and beautiful by the end of the year. Yeah, my bottom.
Nope.
No, exactly.
Nope.
This is not a diet. This is basically a change in
Yes.
deep-seated programming ultimately.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
therefore, I see very much a benefit there. I see the whole thing actually as a very beneficial thing for anyone involving themselves in it. But you're quite right. It is not a straightforward quick fix by no means. It is, however, something that I think might suit certain people to the T. It's always beautiful to see some new thought coming along, some new development coming along. And I applaud you for your perseverance, for your life work, really, to go into this programming and try to come up with ways that are practical and that are actually changing the way the programs run, and therefore our behavior.
Mm-hmm. Thank
Wow.
you.
No, it's good to see that. It's wonderful to see that. Um, how can you imagine that this will be implemented? Have you got any
Well,
dreams? What is your vision?
absolutely. Well, as I've said a couple times, I'm putting up a YouTube channel, a podcast, and that's going to go wide. And the hope is that it catches on and
Right.
that people recognize, hey, I've got that food monster. I know what that is. And when I tell people it's not their fault that they
Mm.
gain the weight
Yeah,
back, but 97% people do, they recognize the truth of that. They
mm,
recognize that
absolutely.
nagging constant urge. I can help you heal that.
Yeah.
That's gone. So I'm hoping that that catches on. Now, I know that very quickly, I mean, immediately, my calendar will fill up and I won't be able to take everybody. So what I'm looking at building is an affiliate program with other Havener practitioners. Now, the
Mm,
training that I've created will be available to anybody who is Haven certified. You have to know what you're doing with the brain. You have to know what that is.
mm,
Just like Francine Shapiro would not give EMDR training to anybody who was not already a psychiatrist or psychologist.
mm,
You don't qualify in her world. Well, same thing here in this world. You have to be a havening practitioner, but the qualification is not 10 years. It's more like 10 months.
mm,
And so you can do this, and that will be something if anybody worldwide just simply takes my course and
mm,
they pass my course, I'll certify them. And they can do that. Now, with my advertising, using the advertising loosely, but with my getting the word out
mm,
through the podcasts, then wildest dreams kind of a thing is it will become
mm,
a global phenomenon. And there will be people in the Philippines who make $1, $3, $4 an hour doing this at that economic price point
yeah.
for the Philippines in their languages.
Mm.
So it's that's the dream. And
I
I may
think
not live to see it, but that's the dream.
I think whatever path people take, it will be a journey. It will be so havening might be something that suits some people and they start off with it. And then there will be other developments, and maybe they're moving off that path towards a different path. That's absolutely fine.
Mhm.
As long as we are all striving towards becoming the best version of ourselves, the best
Yes.
humans. And I think there is a lot to be said about looking very closely at programming within our brains, because that is
Mhm.
what is happening. That's what is driving underneath our behaviors. That is what is happening and what is causing us to respond in certain ways. And maybe this emotional intelligence, that we learn more about that and learn techniques, how we can approach this programming and maybe get rid of it or
Mhm.
strengthen different programming that overrides other things. However we do that, it is a journey. And it's wonderful to hear your approach. It's wonderful to hear a different take on things, because that is how we all learn, how we widen our mind, how we broaden our approach. And yeah, what more can we do than actually educate, teach, and embrace new things? I love it. I love it that you're there with this passion. So thank you so much for coming onto my show. If people want to know more about you, where can they find you?
They can find me at my website right now, which is nevergaintheweightback.com.
Mm,
And there is a free ebook. It is not at the science level that we talked about today. I don't get into all that stuff. It's really for the person who just kind of wants to understand it. There's a free
brilliant.
ebook on the site. Just go and sign
Yeah.
up, and it'll shoot you back the ebook. Very, very easy to read and understand. I wrote it on purpose.
Mm,
for someone who isn't science-backed. So to do that, also in the next 2 or 3 weeks, my YouTube and podcast is called Food Monster Freedom. Food Monster Freedom. That's the YouTube channel that'll be coming up. I'm pretty far along that preparation.
Oh, fantastic. Well, welcome to the world of podcasting. Oh, that is beautiful. You have got a passion for it, and that's wonderful. So thank you so much for being a guest on my show. I wish you all the best for your future. You guys out there, hopefully we were infusing you and teaching you a little bit about the multifactorial contribution to the obesity epidemic that we see nowadays in the Western world. But I want to give you that hope that there are multiple ways, multiple approaches to the problem there. And whilst that might sound confusing, it also means that not everyone is the same. So one approach might suit you, another approach might not suit you at all. So therefore there is hope. So one hasn't worked. Okay, you are not a failure. It's just that hasn't worked. You tried Jenny Craig. Cool. That's fine. Brilliant. Didn't work for you. Or a diet or 15 diets didn't work. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Don't give up and just learn more. And maybe now you've got a better understanding that maybe your mind and your emotions have played a far bigger role than just counting calories or maybe just going for that extra walk. So no, that's brilliant. So, Jason, thank you so much for coming onto my show. And you guys out there, look after yourself and live with intention. Bye.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Stephan. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.